and they're saying this is a proxy for climate. It's a pretty good proxy for precipitation, but they're using it as a thermometer. Okay. And then they put on thermometer measurements because the tree rings show a cooling. Well, the thermometer measurements, which, as I show in Red Hot Lies, are increasingly taken over barbecue grills in Hopkinsville, Kentucky, Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport runway, Tucson parking lot when he used to be out in the field. I mean, they're playing games with the data as well out of NASA, which is why we've got a notice of intent to sue them, by the way. And they're grafting A onto B in order to present the picture that they admit in their emails they need to be true, they want to be true, has to be true. Some of them say, we know it's true even though we can't see it, and these are the lead. This was an IPCC UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change lead author. This guy named Kevin Trenberth said in two of the emails, it's a travesty that he can't find the global warming that he knows is there because his heart tells him so, his computer models tell him so, but our lying eyes don't tell him so, and that's a travesty, he says. We need to go out and get better measurements. We have caught them, for example, this summer. Our National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, which presently is in Copenhagen right now, with a big reception room, with moving visuals, I read, about melting glaciers and so on. You're paying for this. This summer, in order to make its claims of temperatures going up, just slowly backed out of their calculations. They dropped the satellite measurements of the ocean temperatures. Why? Well, the oceans are cooling. The computer models all say the oceans are warming. The oceans cover 2/3 of the Earth's surface. If you include ocean cooling, they've got a problem. So what did they do? They said, we know it's warming, so there must be a bias that the satellite temperatures must be wrong. There's something wrong with our observations. Who are you going to believe, my computer model or your lying eyes? And so on and so on and so on. And I detail these tricks in Red Hot Lies. The principals have now detailed them in their own words in these emails, computer codes, and so on, talking about tricks to hide the decline in temperature, putting in all capitals that says, insert very artificial decline here. All sorts of other claims in which they're admitting they know exactly what they're doing. They use the words fudge and so on, fudge factors for their data to get the desired results.
And now the controlled corporate media is teaching us hide the decline, fudge. That doesn't mean what you think anymore. That means save the polar bears.
Right. The most embarrassing exercise was when the media spent about 8 days telling us the trick was really a scientific colloquialism, and it means different things to people.
Yes.
And I said, that's great. What about the word hide? Or the decline? But they didn't focus on that. They said, well, trick doesn't mean trick. The reasonable meanings and the plain meanings aren't reasonable. Only the unreasonable extrapolations are what they really meant. And they're saying it was in the heat of the moment.
And you've also got statements like, this is just horrible. We can't account for the decline in temperatures. How do we hide it? I mean, it's so clear. And then they're persecuting other scientists and working with government, colluding. Oh, after I explained it to the government, they're not going to release it. Now that they know what type of people these are. And one of the heads of the UN propaganda got questioned by a filmmaker Friday in Copenhagen. It's up on Infowars.com. We'll play the video later, folks. And it's a press conference. He gets up to ask the question, and the guy says, oh, I don't talk about things that come from people that are this immoral. You know, this comes from immoral people, and these are private emails. And he has armed guard come in and start grabbing them and dragging them out. I mean, these people are authoritarian, very authoritarian.
Let me tell you something. I've got a chapter in Red Hot Lies that I quote these people all over the place, openly wistful about, oh, if we only had an enlightened totalitarian system like China, we could get this agenda in place. And that argument is now out in the open. I believe it's Tom Friedman at the New York Times has been recently making it. Oh, if only we had that system. We need to suspend certain liberties, just certain liberties, and just for a little while, because democracy, they say, is getting in the way, and people who we have been unable to convince them to do what's in their own self-interest. We're going to have to make it happen somehow. And I quote them throughout that chapter. They really are getting unabashed about this because no one's calling them on it. And instead, as you pointed out, the media are covering for them. I mean, thrown in, full-out advocates, participants in the global warming industry. They've always been sensationalists. But this goes far beyond that, and I detail that in fact, the opening chapter. So none of what's come out recently are revelations. They're all affirmations. By the way, there was not one personal email that we can find so far, yet they assign that to everything. They say it all shows science as it should be, and yet it's terrible that these things got out and so on.
But the good news is, Christopher Horner, the public isn't buying the Associated Press and CNN telling us nothing to see here, move along. I mean, do you agree that this is devastating? Because all the fraud and all the exposés were building, and through the grassroots, the people were learning, and people were seeing Fortune 500 get behind it, and really a backlash was already there, and then now you're going to tax what plants breathe, and Al Gore making all this money. I mean, is this not devastating them?
I truly believe it is, and again, their reaction tells quite a lot, and the lengths to which the media are going to stop their agenda from taking water is instructive. Now, what are we going to see? Well, the president is talking about, in fact, The Guardian has reported this. I wrote an article in the March issue of what's called Engage, which is the Federalist Society's publication, detailing how what's called a Congressional Executive Agreement, which we have plenty of. For example, NAFTA is a treaty that we decided wasn't a treaty, and therefore you waive the Constitution's Article 2, Section 2 requirement of two-thirds ratification. Two-thirds ratification will never happen for this. So what the president, according to The Guardian now, the old red herself, The Guardian, has reported that the administration is briefing European diplomats, as I've also written, to prepare them for the prospect that we need to write this in a way that it's got to be plausibly declared not a treaty, because then they can say all it takes is 50 plus 1 in both houses, and no amendment, up or down, no filibuster vote under what they call fast track. Now, there's precedent for this in the trade context, but not in a global energy rationing, selective, punitive wealth transfer scheme. So,
and then on top of it, he's saying if you don't ratify it, I'm still going to implement it.
Yeah, then we've got the EPA trying. Now, that doesn't satisfy the wealth transfer, and it doesn't bind us internationally. However, it will. You still can possibly bury that in these enormous spending bills now, ladling more debt on my kids and theirs. And EPA's threatening to do this. Here's what just so you know, nobody wants to take ownership of this hot potato. They were furious that Bush wouldn't start this rulemaking after we lost that Supreme Court case, that he kicked it into this administration. Now, recently, EPA has declared CO2 endangers human health and the environment, to which I first say, try living without it. But now they're going to say, we'll issue this finding, and it's being published tomorrow in the Federal Register. And then they're going to try something unlawful, which is to say do sort of a half-arsed maneuver with it, so that the green groups then march into court, and they and the courts get assigned responsibility for this. In other words, they won't go all the way in implementing it, but they know that the green groups, under the Clean Air Act, can make them. So it's not really plausible deniability, but that's their route, Alex. They don't want to...
Sure. I mean, it's criminal. It's by stealth. It's creeping, like a spider creeping up your bed at night to bite you. Look at Schwarzenegger. He couldn't get the legislature to put a tax on TVs or ban big ones, so he just did it under the California Energy Agency. Look at what's happening in Washington State, where employers tax you now off how you drive, and they have to collect the money. I mean, they're already implementing this everywhere. We know under UNESCO they're brainwashing kids in public school. I mean, this is a criminal cult of pirates. How do we ever extricate ourselves from them? How do we ever remove them? Hopefully some type of criminal charges against these different scientists engaged in fraud. I mean, is there anything we can do to this gang of boobies?
Well, CEI, Competitive Enterprise Institute, that I'm associated with, has petitioned EPA to reopen their record on the basis of the scandal that's been exposed, or I say affirmed. There are people looking into what are called key TAM issues, where you essentially sue on behalf of the king and recover the king's treasure, because, again, there's an intent to defraud on the face of these emails and in the annotated computer code. People are looking at RICO actions against these individuals because fraud could trigger that, and so on. So whether I know that, I don't know. There are attempts to whitewash at the various universities involved right now. I've got a notice of intent to sue NASA by the end of the year. It'll be January before I get around to it. If they don't cough up their equivalent of this data in these emails, because I've been denied for more than 2 years, and I finally had enough when this thing broke. And so we're going to have to use the courts just like they do. Now, if we get involved in this treaty, it has a provision that has a 3-year cooling-off period for getting out, which is 3 years to generate all sorts of... You saw what they did to the U.S. under Bush. 3 years of generating intense diplomatic and political pressure against America to stay in an energy rationing and wealth transfer scheme. So you can't